This evening we have Dr. Erica Britt here from the University. And Erica's going to talk to us about the oral history project that she has been doing in Flint, and also about oral history projects in general. And I just wanted to put in a plug for StoryCorps, which is here at the library through September. And they extended their period here because of the water crisis. And so you can sign up anytime to share a story from your family, about the water crisis, about anything. And so those oral histories are going to the Library of Congress. So I just wanted to put that plug in. A couple other housekeeping things. So on August 21st, Hubert Roberts, who's in the back of the room, will be talking about the new Jim Crow. So we look at racism every month, but we also look at African American history here in Flint every month. And then the ones for, this is August, so September are out as well. And we have stacks of them around the room. Please take a stack with you. If you can share them at work or at school or your area library or churches or anywhere you can share them. We'd appreciate that immensely. And so with that, have I done all the housekeeping? Please take time to critique this and give us ideas for future discussions. And I will be quiet and I will turn it over to Dr.
Where do you sign up for StoryCorps?
Downstairs with the library. It's here at the library. It's all happening here. There.
First floor.
First floor.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Donna, and thank you to Neighbors Without Borders for inviting me to this Tendaji Talk. I'm so thankful because Tendaji, as we all know, was a dear contributor to this community in education, and I'm really honored to be able to join in this series in honor of him. Okay, so as Donna said, I want to share a little bit about the oral history project that I'm working on at the University of Michigan Flint, and give you a little bit of the background about why we're doing that project, some of the bigger themes that are involved in that project, and then narrowing it down to the discussion of African American history in terms of the stories that are showing up in the oral histories that we're collecting. First of all, I have to start off by telling you who I am so you can understand whether or not I'm legit. I might not be legit, and you have to figure that out, and you can tell me and give me feedback and help fill in the gaps for what I know and what I don't know. I'm a linguist, which means that I study language. I do really obnoxious things with language, like look at people's pronunciations. Did they get spit coming off of their T when they said it? What's the grammar of their language like? I'm a sociolinguist, and what that also means is that I take those T's with all those spit hanging off of them and look at how that pronunciation or that grammar fits into someone's bigger social identity. So what does their language tell us about their culture, their community, their ethnic group, their age, their class? And so I'm a linguist through and through, right? And so how did a linguist come to an oral history project? It seems like it kind of doesn't make any sense. But somehow, and one other thing I should tell you about myself is that I'm not a Flint native. I'm actually new to Flint. I came here in 2011, and what I like to say about this project is that this project is as much about me as it is about the community. And what I mean by that is this project is my chance to learn about Flint and get to know its people and get to know the community, which now I call home, and which I find very precious. And I want to know more about the stories that people are telling about Flint, and I want to be part of that process of sharing Flint's story with the rest of the world. So here I am, a linguist collecting oral histories, and I want to give you a little bit of background about the project. First, let me just tell you what this talk will entail, so you can kind of know what to look for. First, I'll start with the question, why stories? Like, why the heck would I, as a linguist, be looking at oral histories to begin with? Then I'll share more details about the Vehicles and Voices project. That's the bigger oral history project that these stories were collected as part of. Then I'll talk about some of the details of the African American stories that have shown up as part of that bigger project. And the last part is you. I want to hear from you about your voice, your stories. What are the things that you want to include in the narrative about Flint? Big thing I want to put out there, though, is that I hope that this is an interactive session. So as I share these stories and as I share my perspective and share what people have shared with me, I do hope you don't mind raising your hand and interjecting, or if you hear something that you're like, wait a minute, I experienced it a little differently, please feel free to share it. Hopefully this is a friendly space, and I want to hear from you. And the first thing that I want to hear from you, I assume that you like stories, right? Maybe that's the wrong assumption, but I think I should put out there that stories seem to be important. And I guess the question I have for you, and I do hope you don't mind participating, why do we tell stories? Why are stories so important for you personally? Or maybe that's the wrong question. Are stories important for you? Yes.
Yes, that's how humans communicate.
Okay, so it's part of our experience of being human. We gotta communicate. Okay, other people, don't be shy. Yes.
Well, historically, that's how we passed our history down in terms of Africa. You know, in terms of African Americans, that's how we communicate with each other.
Yeah. So we get this chain of history that comes in through our story. Yeah.
And in traditional elder Asian communities, talk stories was how we came to know who we are as a people.
Yes, so we're human, right? We're sharing history across time, and then we get to know the self through our stories. Yeah.
It's also a method of teaching morals to a community.
So you hear
And
that story.
the Old Testament is prime turf.
The whole text is telling us the story of a people and what lessons we should learn from how they live their life and how, as a community, we value certain things. I think there was a hand up in the back, I don't know.
I think stories are more powerful than logic and facts in transforming behavior and connecting me, a white person, to the same shared tragedy as someone of black or brown or red or yellow connection. And I want to say that white folks told stories too, because none of us were very literate, not too many generations ago. I've been looking at my great uncle's diaries, and his family generation before were slave owners, and watching his horrible writing and hearing his stories, which are sometimes racist and sometimes full of compassion for the people that made them work their farms and cared for their children. It's just contradictory. So stories are important for us to change.
We learn so much about that generation's life and what motivated them and what, how did they get in these very contradictory situations, and we might learn lessons even for how we would do something different. Yeah.
As a minister, one Sunday I was telling a story of how my grandmother had trained me and some of the funny things that had happened. And at that time I had a white congregation, and there was a lady there from Louisiana who was visiting, and I noticed she laughed at the correct place in my story. And so after church I asked her, I noticed you laughed, what was going on? And in this thick southern drawl she said, well, after all, they all went to the same grandmama school. So many of the things that we do are similar.
Yeah.
We've just been taught to look at the dissimilar part.
Exactly. So the stories kind of help us build connection. You'll hear from someone else's story, something shared, like, okay, I know that experience, I had it. Or you hear that story and it'll teach you a lesson about how to move through something really difficult, right? So we find out the stories, as the gentleman in the back said, are part of this human experience, and it's a process of learning and a process for us to make sense of the world around us. And I'm a linguist, of course, and so I'm always excited by the language component of stories. And colleagues who are working in different fields, urban geography for Deborah Martin, others in anthropology, others in sociolinguistics, linguistic anthropology, they all know that stories are critical for communities. And there's some details about stories I wanted to talk about, because then it'll help make sense of why I'm doing the project I'm doing. First of all, language provides a means to express common experiences, values, and narratives about place. This is all what you just said. You gave that to me. You could write that book, right? So we don't even need this. Just write it down, whatever you just said to me. And again, as you've all said, language tells us about our community. It helps us understand place. It helps us make sense of the world that we're living in, right? And stories, again, are a crucial part of that linguistic or language product. Another component about stories that I don't think we have said today is the power of stories. And again, I come to this work thinking about issues of power and inequality, part of my linguistic training. And Martin goes on to talk more about institutional power. So who gets to tell what story? And who gets to frame the story? Was that
a question, or you just stated?
I was just stating it, but if you responded to it, that's great.
The person that's in power gets to write the story.
Yeah.
Just like Donald Trump, or just like the history, James Morgan speaks about how, as a black person born in this country, being told that that's the worst thing you could ever be, you know, and that is what we live with today.
Exactly, and someone created that story, and we know that story not to be true, but yet that story has incredible power. And what Martin's talking about here is how stories, if they're part of an institution, say a racist institution, or if it's part of a media institution, all these people who have incredible power can control our experience of the world through the very stories that they tell. We can maintain certain forms of power. We define the terms, you know, are you a good kid? Are you a bad kid? Are you a good city? Is it a bad city? Is it a great place to live? Is it a terrible place to live? And by just simply framing the story in a certain kind of way, you exercise power against the people who live in those communities. If you're a kid being labeled a certain kind of way in your classroom, it sets the stage for how you experience the rest of your education. And we know that stories then represent power, and that power is real. It has an impact on our lives.
When I was growing up, Tales of Uncle Remus was popular. And it was framed allegedly by Joe Chandler Harris as the animals talking, even in dialect. Well, they gave us a certain connotation of how animals, but animal nature in humans work. And it's only been lately that his copyright to this material was revoked. Because people like you, us in the room, went to studying his work and said, oh no, he lifted those stories from the slaves on his plantation. And so it was in public domain then.
So who controls the story? Who makes profit off of the stories? This is all things that we think about. And institutional power is important for me. So here I am, a university faculty member, part of an institution that has a lot of power in the city of Flint. And the question I always have for myself is, how do I use that power for social good rather than taking from a community or rather than tearing down a community? How do we take that power for me as an instructor or for my students who are part of that institution? How do they develop an understanding of that power used for social transformation, for social development? And we'll find out that stories are an incredible part of that process of breaking down power. As you all have said, this is my colleague Barbara Johnstone studying people in Indiana, looking at narratives and saying that narrative creates truth, right? So again, if you get this narrow window of stories told about a certain person or a certain place, you come away from it believing that that's the truth about that person or that's the truth about that place. And there's a change in this, right? So you get a report, someone says something about this thing that happened, and then that report becomes something else, which becomes something else, which then becomes the truth, right? Right? We know that chain. We know that chain of events, and if you've ever been on the receiving end of it, you know it very well. It's not fun. But still, narratives create truth, and in her work, she found out that narratives shaped how people even experience the world. What stories could men tell? What stories could women tell? And that was all part of the community's history, right? And it becomes a kind of universal practice that's kind of embedded in how people start to understand the world. You know, I think about the stories that I was told as a kid about my family's history or about our community. Didn't know if they were true, but they were true in my mind. And they stayed true until I heard something else, right? And I'm pretty sure all of you have had an experience where the truth got shaken up a little bit, like, as you found out some other details, right? So again, thinking then about my role in the institution with people who are shaping stories and whether those very stories become the truth for a community, that's become something that I want to think very seriously about.
When you talk about truth getting shaken up, as a kid growing up, there was this poem or whatever you want to call it about little black Sambo sitting under the tree. And I even as a kid found that a little offensive. Didn't quite know why. As I got older, it was more and more offensive to me. But it wasn't until later when my grandfather was studying to be able to vote in Mississippi, at the time that they had to be able to read and write the state constitution, the interpreted rather, that I found a copy of the Mississippi State Constitution, and it devoted 4.5 pages to defining race. What was a white person? What was a mulatto? What was it went right on down. But finally it mentioned this Sambo, which I found fascinating because then I found out that a Sambo was the racial cross between a mulatto and a black. So when they said little black Sambo, they were putting a heavy on this kid who turned out darker than they wanted it to be, and putting it into a racial classification, that still strange now.
That's powerful, right? Because you know, it's like the categories themselves. We know that they're not real in certain kind of ways, but they're real for us, right? The experience is very real. They have implications for us, right? So this is the kind of truths that then impact our life and impact our community. One person that really inspired me is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I don't know if you've heard of her. I hope you have. If not, please
No,
check
you
her
gotta
out.
pronounce that name again.
Chimamanda. She's a great Nigerian author. She's a really wonderful author. She does a lot of Chimamanda. Just look her up. If you don't pronounce the name, just look her up on TED. She's a really great author, and she writes about the experience of being from the continent of Africa. And we often think about the stories we've been told about Africa. Now, it's not a country, but we've been envisioned it as one place. And also we have these ideas, okay, there's not a lot of infrastructure, it's a third world place, people are not being fed well, and you know, there's all kind of things that we're told about that place. And she says, well, wait a minute, that's only one very narrow slice of the experience of being in Africa. You know, you'll be shocked then to go to Nigeria and see a very cosmopolitan group of people who are tech entrepreneurs and who are living a very cosmopolitan life. But the story that's been told very much is stereotypical, and it's a single story. She resists the single story that's been told about Africa. And she says that it's not just that they're not true. I mean, maybe there's a partial truth to them, but they're incomplete. We don't hear about all the other details that makes Africa or Nigeria or other places in the so-called third world so awesome and so amazing. And she pushes against the danger of a single story. And as I think about this oral history project, what I hope to gather from the various people who talk to me is multiple stories of coming from Flint, multiple versions of the experience of living in this place. So moving past a single narrative of the city to a kind of more dynamic, more engaged narrative of various people sharing their various takes on the experience of living here. Okay, so again, I'm not from Flint, so the first stories that I heard from Flint had to come from somewhere. And of course, I got on Google. I said, tell me about Flint, because you know, I got a great job here, I'm excited. First thing that shows up on the Google search is #1 most dangerous city in the country. Oh, wait, where am I going? Oh, and then the second story, okay, least desirable place to live. Oh no, this is where I'm coming from my career. What? No, this is not the story I was expecting. But that's the story I heard. And then if you watch TV or watch movies, you might have seen Roger and Me. How many of you have seen Roger and Me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I heard it's a very controversial thing to watch and discuss in Flint.
Yeah, I got invited out of a house about it.
Right? But this is something that told us that Flint is a place where there's economic decline. Flint is a place where there's increasing crime and poverty. Flint is a place where people tried to fix it but failed, right? And that's a narrative that you see captured in that piece of media, right, about Flint. And that's one of the stories I heard about Flint before I came here, along with all the others. And again, when I first was coming here, I had relatives who only heard that story who said, your first birthday present in Flint, I'm gonna buy you a taser. Why buy you a taser? Right? You know, like this is some serious stuff people are bringing about my experience coming to Flint, right? So that's the story. So that's the story that I hear in the media. Other stories I hear, Flint is the most dangerous city in America, #1 ranking for 3 years. Forbes list of most miserable cities in the country. Miserable cities.
We better run.
And it's a rep, right? It's a rep that kind of travels through media channels. And again, we start thinking about institutional power, controlling a narrative and limiting it to a certain set of experiences of Flint, which may indeed, and we know indeed, are true in certain elements, right? So we know there's violence, we know there's economic decline. But what else do we know about Flint? Right? I mean, I came here and I was like, oh, hey, I like this place. Hey, I like my neighborhood. And oh, my friends are the best people I ever met right here in Flint.